Story number 1. The Whispering Room. In 2015, a young woman named Rachel moved into a small, affordable studio apartment in Chicago. She was starting a new job and wanted to save money, so the price tag, despite being oddly low, was irresistible. The landlord explained the discount with a shrug. Previous tenants didn't stay long. Something about bad vibes. Rachel laughed it off. She didn't believe in that kind of thing. The first night was uneventful, but by the second, Rachel began noticing strange occurrences. She'd hear faint whispering in the dead of night, always coming from the corner of the room near a sealed, decorative fireplace. The whispers weren't in English, or any language she recognized. At first, she thought it was just the wind through the old building, but even on still nights, the sound persisted. A week in, Rachel started waking up at exactly 3:12 a.m. every night, paralyzed with fear. She'd feel an oppressive presence in the room, as if someone or something was standing by her bed watching her. One night, she swore she saw a shadowy figure in the corner. She turned on every light in the apartment and didn't sleep until morning. Determined to rationalize her fears, Rachel invited her best friend, Emily, to stay over. The two stayed up late, watching movies, laughing, and drinking wine. Around 3 a.m., the temperature in the room plummeted. Emily complained about feeling dizzy, and soon after, the whispering began. This time, it was louder, clearer, a guttural chant that made Rachel's skin crawl. Emily froze, staring at the fireplace. "There's something wrong with this place, Rachel," she whispered, her voice shaking. The next day, Emily convinced Rachel to look into the apartment's history. A quick online search revealed a horrifying truth. The building had once been a boarding house in the 1920s. A man named Leonard Reese, a self-proclaimed medium, had lived in Rachel's unit. He was infamous for conducting seances, claiming to summon spirits for grieving families. The sessions grew darker as Reese's mental state deteriorated. One night, he locked himself in the room and performed a ritual no one could interrupt. The neighbors reported strange noises, and the next morning, Reese was found dead, his body contorted unnaturally in front of the fireplace. After his death, tenants reported ghostly activity. The fireplace was eventually sealed, but the whispers never stopped. That night, Rachel couldn't bring herself to sleep. At 3:12 a.m., the whispering started again, louder and more insistent. Suddenly, the room filled with the smell of burning wood. The sealed fireplace began to glow faintly, and Rachel felt a hand grip her shoulder, cold and strong. She ran out of the apartment barefoot and didn't stop until she reached Emily's car. When she returned the next day to collect her things, the landlord asked, "Moving out so soon?" Rachel only nodded, too shaken to explain. As she turned to leave, the landlord muttered almost to himself, "They never last long. He won't let them." To this day, Rachel refuses to talk about what happened in that apartment. The building still stands, but the unit is rarely occupied, and the whispers continue. Story number 2. The Haunting of Willow Creek Asylum. Willow Creek Asylum had stood at the edge of Briarwood Forest for over a century, a crumbling relic of a darker past. Built in 1892, it was a sanctuary for society's forgotten, the mentally ill, the destitute, and the criminally insane. Over the decades, rumors of abuse, malpractice, and strange disappearances plagued its reputation. By 1954, it was shut down under mysterious circumstances, left to decay as nature slowly reclaimed it. By 2020, Willow Creek had become a magnet for urban explorers and thrill seekers. The stories of strange noises, ghostly apparitions, and inexplicable cold spots were too tantalizing for some to resist. Among them was a group of 4 friends: Claire, Ethan, Lucas, and Maggie. They were amateur paranormal investigators with a modest YouTube channel. Determined to boost their subscriber count, they planned an overnight stay in the asylum. The group arrived at dusk, armed with cameras, flashlights, and a Ouija board for dramatic effect. The building loomed ahead, its facade covered in ivy, windows shattered like jagged teeth. A rusted iron gate creaked as they pushed through, and the air grew noticeably colder. "This place is a cliché," Lucas joked, though his laughter felt hollow. Inside, the asylum was worse than they imagined. Graffiti covered the peeling walls, and the air was thick with the smell of mildew and rot. The floor was littered with debris, broken furniture, crumpled patient records, and old medical equipment. Ethan set up a camera in the main hallway while Maggie started live streaming. "Welcome to the Willow Creek Asylum," she said in her most dramatic voice. "Tonight, we'll uncover the truth behind the legends." Are the ghosts real or just a figment of imagination? As they explored, the friends felt the weight of the asylum's history pressing down on them. In the children's ward, tiny handprints were smeared across the walls in faded red paint, or at least they hoped it was paint. In the electroshock therapy room, rusted equipment lay scattered, and the walls bore deep gouges as though clawed by desperate hands. By midnight, they reached the heart of the asylum, the morgue. The air grew colder with every step, their breaths visible in the dim light of their flashlights. "This is it," Claire whispered. "This is where the worst activity has been reported." They set up their equipment in the center of the room, placing the Ouija board on a slab once used for autopsies. Ethan adjusted the camera while Maggie readied herself to narrate. "Is there anyone here with us?" Maggie asked, her fingers lightly touching the planchette. The others followed suit. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the planchette jerked slightly. "Very funny, Lucas," Claire said, rolling her eyes. "It wasn't me," he replied, his voice uncharacteristically serious. The planchette moved again, slowly spelling out a single word: "Help." "What do you need help with?" Maggie asked, her voice trembling now. The board responded with another word: "Run." Suddenly, a deafening crash echoed through the morgue. The friends jumped as a steel tray fell from a counter, clattering to the ground. Their flashlight beams darted around the room, but they saw nothing that could have caused it. "Let's get out of here," Claire said, her voice shaking. But as they packed their equipment, Ethan froze, staring at the far corner of the room. "Did you see that?" he whispered. "See what?" Lucas asked, but his voice wavered. Ethan pointed. "Over there." Something moved. The group turned their flashlights toward the corner. At first, there was nothing but darkness. Then, a figure stepped into the light, a shadowy, indistinct form, its head tilted unnaturally to one side. It didn't walk so much as glide, its movements jerky and inhuman. Maggie screamed as the figure vanished, leaving only the oppressive silence. "We're leaving!" Lucas shouted, grabbing Maggie's arm. As they hurried back toward the main hall, the asylum seemed to come alive. Doors slammed in the distance, and a low, guttural moan echoed through the corridors. The air grew colder with every step, and the shadows seemed to twist and reach for them. They reached the front doors only to find them stuck. No matter how hard they pulled or pushed, the heavy wooden doors wouldn't budge. "This isn't happening," Claire whispered, panic rising in her chest. Ethan pulled out his phone, but there was no signal. "We'll find another way," he said, trying to sound calm. The group moved deeper into the asylum, searching for another exit. In the process, they became hopelessly lost. The hallways seemed to stretch endlessly, twisting and looping back on themselves in impossible ways. The whispers started soon after, faint at first, then louder, closer. The voices spoke in fragmented phrases. "Help me. Don't leave. Stay forever. What the hell is this place?" Maggie cried, tears streaming down her face. As they turned a corner, they stumbled into the surgical ward. Rusted tables and instruments lay scattered, and the walls were covered in crude drawings etched into the plaster, figures with hollow eyes, screaming faces, and outstretched hands. In the center of the room stood a figure. This time it was solid, its features horrifyingly clear. It was a man, or what had once been a man. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken and lifeless. His body was draped in a blood-stained hospital gown, and his hands were blackened as if burned. "Why are you here?" the figure rasped, its voice echoing unnaturally. "We didn't mean to disturb," Ethan began, but the figure cut him off with a bone-chilling scream that seemed to shake the walls. The lights on their cameras flickered and died, plunging them into darkness. In the chaos, the group scattered, running blindly through the asylum. Claire found herself alone in a narrow hallway. She could hear the others shouting in the distance, but their voices grew fainter with every step. The whispers returned, louder now, circling her. "Leave me alone," she screamed, her voice echoing back at her. But then she saw them, figures emerging from the walls, their hollow eyes fixed on her. They reached for her with skeletal hands, their touch icy and paralyzing. When Claire's scream cut through the night, it was the last thing any of them heard. By dawn, a local search party found the group's car abandoned outside the asylum. Inside the building, there was no sign of Claire, Ethan, Lucas, or Maggie. Their equipment was discovered scattered throughout the halls, footage corrupted beyond recovery. The only clue was a single message scratched into the wall near the entrance. "It won't let us leave." Willow Creek Asylum remains off-limits, a place shrouded in fear and mystery. Locals say that on quiet nights you can still hear the screams of the lost echoing through the forest. Story number 3. The Shadow Beneath the Lake. In the quiet town of Ashwood, nestled deep within the Appalachian Mountains, there was a lake locals refused to visit after sunset. Black Hollow Lake was known for its unnatural stillness, as if no wind dared ripple its surface. It was beautiful in daylight, but by night it turned sinister, a perfect mirror reflecting nothing but darkness. In the summer of 2018, Daniel, a travel blogger chasing urban legends, decided to spend a week camping near the lake. Locals warned him not to go, but he dismissed their stories as superstitions. He was determined to uncover the truth about the place's eerie reputation. On his first night, the forest was unusually silent. No crickets, no rustling leaves, just the oppressive quiet of the lake. Daniel sat by the water with his camera, hoping to capture something extraordinary. Around midnight, he noticed faint ripples on the surface, though the air was calm. Peering closer, he thought he saw a dark figure under the water, just beneath the surface. It didn't swim or move naturally. It seemed to float, observing him. When he shined his flashlight at the spot, the ripples stopped and the figure disappeared. Convinced it was just his imagination, Daniel returned to his tent. By the second night, Daniel started hearing whispers coming from the lake. He couldn't make out the words, but the voices were low and rhythmic, like a chant. Grabbing his camera, he crept closer to the water's edge. This time, he saw it again, a shadow moving beneath the surface, larger and more defined than before. It wasn't shaped like a fish or any creature he could recognize. It was vaguely human, but its limbs were too long, its movements too fluid. Daniel backed away, his heart pounding. It's just a trick of the light, he told himself. But when he reviewed the footage later, the shadow was gone. On the third night, Daniel set up motion sensors and cameras around his campsite. At exactly 3:15 a.m., the sensors blared, waking him from a restless sleep. Stepping outside, he saw footprints in the damp soil leading from the lake to his tent. Bare, webbed prints that were far too large to belong to any human. The whispers grew louder, surrounding him, though no one was there. Panicked, Daniel aimed his flashlight toward the lake. The water wasn't calm anymore. It churned violently, though there was no wind. Rising from the center of the chaos was a figure, tall and shadowy, its eyes glowing faintly. It began to wade toward him, its impossibly long limbs dragging across the shore. Daniel ran. He didn't stop until he reached his car, leaving his tent and equipment behind. As he sped away, he glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the figure standing at the edge of the forest, watching him. The next morning, he returned to retrieve his gear, but everything was gone. Tent, cameras, even the footprints. The ground near the lake was undisturbed, as if he'd never been there. Daniel never blogged about his experience. Friends noticed he was no longer the adventurous, curious man he'd once been. He stopped traveling and moved to a crowded city, far from any lakes or forests. Black Hollow Lake remains untouched. Locals continue to warn strangers. Don't go near the water after dark. It doesn't like to be disturbed.